Life and Teaching of the Masters of the Far East by Baird T. Spalding. Volume 4. Published 1948. Chapter 1. Great Brotherhood and World Peace. 1. Before going further in the study of certain underlying laws and facts regarding the teachings of the Masters, it is well to consider the scope their vision covers. One must enlarge his mind and outlook upon life to that in which the Masters work in order to fully understand the full purport of their teachings. At this time we will deal chiefly with the field to be taken into consideration and the general trends of mankind in order that we may fully adapt ourselves to the work that is before us. It is necessary to know the nature and scope of a field of work before selecting the tools and laying down a plan for tending the field. We must know to what the field is adapted, what crops are to be raised, and to what end the cultivation is to be directed. There must be a purpose back of all work, and it is far beyond the reaches of what we commonly call our own individual nature. Each man's nature in one way and another is vitally associated with the life and well-being of every other individual in the world, and what affects one must in some degree affect the rest of humanity. 2. I rather feel that this discussion of peace should be very general because everyone is interested. The fact is that the world is becoming peace-minded and that people are saying that we have had enough of war. People are beginning to understand that war is not a natural condition, and to understand that all those who assume the role of providence by setting themselves up as the embodiment of perfect justice, the creators of happiness, are only deceivers. Peace and happiness, the heart's desire of all humanity, is not a gift to be bestowed upon mankind, but has to be earned by honest effort. There is not such a thing as political miracles. Man has to realize that he alone has the power to work out his destiny with his own intelligence. 3. This sweeping tide of human interest in that which will promote and guarantee peace is the inevitable working out of the universal law which always moves to promote the common good. God is no respecter of persons, and this awakening of men along peace lines is their response to the movement of the spirit of peace which is fostered by the Masters. Only as the individual identifies himself with universal law can he expect to find his individual good, for it is inseparably united with the common good. For this reason, true progress is slow and suffering is great. 4. There is a great brotherhood throughout the world who have been working for peace for thousands of years. They are back of every movement for world peace and are becoming stronger and stronger all the time. There are now about 216 groups throughout the world. There is always one central unit as a first or centralizing body, and 12 units which surround that unit, giving it more force and power. They are working also for the enlightenment of the whole world. 5. These groups are really composed of human beings who are actuated by the high thought of the White Brotherhood. All of these groups work together. There is a very strong thought coming to the whole world for peace and enlightenment as well. 6. There are many misconceptions regarding the White Brotherhood. It must first be understood that they never make themselves known as such, nor are they exclusively back of any outer organization or organizations. They are universal in their function and purpose. They definitely work with the universal law to universal ends, and any individual or group working toward the same ends without selfish or group motives, many receive their full support. This support may be known on the part of the man, but it is more likely to come in the form of an unknown stimulus. That is, the help is not likely to assume the form of that coming from any definite place or person. Those receiving this support are conscious only of the help or influence. 7. The League of Nations originally was an instrument of the White Brotherhood, but it was misused in many ways by certain nations and individuals. It will, however, come back under the guidance of the Brotherhood sometime in the future. 8. The birth of a new order is in process. We are witnessing right now the destruction of an old civilization. The White Brotherhood will assert itself positively on the most important issues when the time is propitious. 9. The time has come when there can be no halfway ground in this purification of the race, whether or not individuals or groups array themselves against the common good in this day. The mills of God grind swiftly at times and also finely. Only from the siftings shall the selfish and aggressively grasping rear a new life structure. It were far better to unify oneself with purely creative motives that contribute to universal good, for thereby shall good come to the individual. 10. Often the influences working in universal ideas come into being without much notice. It is something that seems to germinate and move forward as a contagion while the minds of many are still so engrossed in other things that they do not notice the change. Then, all of a sudden, each individual seems to realize that it has come into being and that it is in exact accord with his own secret thoughts. Thus, he very often slips into the new order rather unknowingly. The point is to be alert to these secretly developing forces within oneself and in the race, and here one will find the key to his most rapid progress and most vital service in the universal cause. 11. India has maintained peace by using methods identical to those used by these 216 groups about which I have spoken. It was brought about originally by 12 groups which have expanded and are still expanding. The influence of these bodies has been very great, entering into the whole fabric of Indian thought. Their work from the outer point of view has been largely educational. They release information orally which is acted upon under their direction. Results prove the efficacy of this method. 12. Gandhi studied the situation of non-violence for 20 years before he began his work, becoming a very deep student of it. The principle has been in existence in India for 600 years. Because of the untouchables, it was made operative through Gandhi in this generation. Gandhi went among the untouchables, teaching non-violence, making it an effective force. The younger generation took it up immediately. They recognized the great effect of it and it spread throughout all India. The younger generation now have brought it before the people stronger than ever. This will eventually result in the dissolution of the caste system. The untouchables became quite an issue there as they numbered some 65 million and guidance was necessary because they had such powerful influence. Gandhi has been almost entirely responsible for their present emancipation. 13. Those in the groups mentioned that are working for world peace are persons of a very high spiritual understanding. One man of each group is always prominent as one of spiritual attainment. 14. There are some 60 in the United States who definitely belong to this association. They are very quiet concerning their connection with it. They do not give out the place of their group meetings or any information concerning their activities. 15. This is why many people are more or less incredulous concerning the great work being done by the illumined. They are so accustomed to outer show and display that they cannot imagine any great work being done in such a quiet, simple manner. But if one will stop to think for just a moment, he will realize that all the motivating forces of the universe are silent and those who work consciously with these forces move according to motives. There will come a time, however, when they will work more openly, but that will be when there are enough illumined people to know and understand just what they are doing. Study your own experiences. Are you not aware that silent influences working underneath the surface of your own being are those forces which control your life more than the outwardly manifest things which you express in words? However, just as these silent broodings of your own inner nature eventually find their outer expression when you are in an environment which harmonizes with them, you do not hesitate to express them. Study yourself and you will find everything working in you just as it is in the race. What the Father sees in secret, he will reward you openly, is not an idle statement, but it reveals the manner in which all things come into being in the outer world. To understand this fact will not only be to better understand yourself, but also the manner of the universal spiritual work that is going on underneath the surface all the time. It is only through adapting oneself to this sort of conscious procedure that he will be able to clearly trace the workings of the secret brotherhood. Their activities are hidden only to those who do not discern the mode of accomplishment. We are accustomed to noise and display, and the quiet yet most powerful forces in ourselves and the world about us go unnoticed. We follow the noisy people into bypaths and lose the path of life that moves in stillness through our own individual being. 16. This brotherhood is not properly an organization, as anyone can belong who will work constructively either openly or silently for peace. It is rather an association of kindred spirits. They cooperate, in fact, with any association or organization that is for the benefit of mankind or the advancement of humanity. 17. The group in India works silently, but it is its influence that brings these bodies together and coordinates their activities. It was the activity of this very group that brought the Nobel Peace Prize before the world. 18. Tolstoy was a great factor in making this principle practically effective. But it has always been presented through the 9 rulers of India. Tolstoy was an advanced soul. He was working with the great central group all the time. 19. While no one knows its exact location, that 13th group has always been a very dominant factor in world education. That group of 12 are working in every educational center in the world. 20. These groups are not an organization here or anywhere that makes propaganda for world peace. It was seen that the spoken word, or the silent word, when sent out to the world, was of far greater influence than the written word. The written word can be garbled. The spoken word is an ever-expanding and ever-increasing influence. 21. Here again is the wisdom of the wise which has always been in evidence. So long as constructive forces work in secret, they grow unnoticed by those who would destroy their effect. The world does not realize the advance of the constructive force until it has already undermined the sordid structures of the selfish and self-seeking, and then it is too late. At the time of such helpless disintegration, and only then, are the activities of the Brotherhood likely to come out into the open to strengthen the truth in the minds of all the people. This is not done through fear of attack but through knowledge of the most powerful way to bring about any great constructive movement for world betterment. The selfish have no access to it. 22. In a sense, all those who are working for India's freedom or for the freedom and peace of the world are avatars, as the Western world looks at the avatars. Many of the great ones have been disseminating this teaching for thousands of years. Jesus has been and is working definitely for the betterment of the whole world. 23. The reason many people in the Western world do not recognize the work of avatars is that they can conceive of them only as working on the surface, saying and doing spectacular and miraculous things in public. They do not know that the true miracles are always worked out in silence first. 24. Regarding arbitration as an instrument for world peace, this movement was started in the Punjab of India. It is a powerful instrument of world peace. It has completely outlawed aggression. India never did use an aggressive attitude, never did encourage open warfare in that territory at all, and the Punjab was the greatest influence back of this whole movement. It has been maintained throughout India for about 3,000 years. Non-aggression and arbitration have been proved practical. 25. W. J. Bryan, consciously or unconsciously actuated by the silent influence, succeeded in getting peace treaties with all but 4 nations. So far no national character has since dared to take up his work. It will be taken up again someday in the future with the forming of a board of men, unknown to the outer world, that will have complete authority from the peace societies and groups working unselfishly for world peace. 26. If all the financial world were to get behind this movement for unity, it would be the greatest influence for peace. There could then be no finances for war. It could be impossible to finance war and hence there could be no war. If the cooperative system should be adopted universally, there could be no booms and no more depressions. It would also be of great influence in the abolition of war. As a matter of fact, cooperation is coming into existence. The people who do not cooperate and align themselves with the new order will be outlawed completely. 27. Following this spreading tendency to outlaw war, people will have their eyes open to the causes of war, which are in the sole promotion of group or national advantages. The practice of non-cooperation will also be outlawed as a contributing cause of war. This brings the whole thing right down to the individual, and each one must outlaw his own selfishness and self-seeking at the expense of others. He as an individual will find that the best way to promote his own interest is to promote the common interest, and the only way to preserve his own good is to preserve the good of the whole. This silent tendency is now being awakened on a broad scale. But each individual must find its beginning in himself, and one who will earnestly search his own soul will find the embryo of this movement increasing in his own nature every day. Spreading from individual to individual, it will grow into a mighty world movement and will be the ultimate motive in all human activities. Just as the individual who does not obey this eternal trend of his inner nature is destroyed, so will such groups, institutions, religious organizations, races and nations be disintegrated, leaving the world for those who love the law of God and live that law in relationship to every other man and nation. 28. In all modern movements it is clearly revealed that the changes must be first in the individual, for, unless his own nature is properly correlated with the movement back of outer conduct, he becomes a disintegrating factor in any movement that might otherwise accomplish untold good. One can scarcely do anything in the way of accomplishing universal peace until he has found peace within his own nature, and he cannot find peace in his own nature until he has been long enough truly in touch with the unseen forces which move toward the common good. 29. There is no question but that the individual first must be at peace. Not only that, but he must realize what it means to the individual as well as to the nation. If he is centralized in that idea of peace, he projects that influence and he becomes one of the great moving factors of the spiritual development of the age. The peace movement is one of the most definite factors towards spiritual enlightenment as well. 30. Politics will be broken down completely with this new system that is coming. But, so long as the present political setup endures, no really effective program can be launched and carried to a successful conclusion. Everyone who keeps in step with the trend of the times is receiving all the help he is capable of receiving from these higher forces. Some of them receive this help consciously, some unconsciously, but nevertheless the help is there. Some have gone so far that they know and acknowledge this help. 31. Political parties, in the working out of the underneath movement of constructive forces, will probably merge into one great party for greater simplicity of government. These changes must come through our party system, moving into single-chamber legislation and not divided. A house divided against itself shall fall. That will eradicate a great many of our political evils. This will all originate within the states due to changes brought about there. It is coming as a national movement in the United States. 32. Peace is here. When we relate ourselves definitely to that principle, it makes us a working unit. For the teacher. Paragraph 1. It should be clearly developed in the beginning of this study that the people generally need a new perspective in the matter of spiritual progress. We have for the most part been pursuing the whole subject as that of bearing entirely upon the body and the things which we imagine the body should have. In reality, all the body is and has depends upon something infinitely beyond these. Paragraph 2. Show by further illustration, if possible, how the general reaction of the people is in the direction of peace, and that back of this is the coming of the purpose of the universe, or God. Paragraph 3. Show your students how this peace movement which is springing up is identical with their own ideals, awakening them to the fact that they are inwardly actuated by universal movements that are the objectives of all the illumined. Paragraphs 4 to 12. Show how brotherhood comes into being through obedience to innermost impulses toward general betterment, and that the difference between one's relationship to another in a sense of unity and the relationship of the white brotherhood to the whole is but the difference in the degree to which they are actuated by these deeper impulses. Paragraphs 13 and 14 doubtless will stand in your presentation much as they are, unless your knowledge includes much that is only referred to lightly in these paragraphs. Paragraph 15, 16. This should make clear why it is impossible for the average individual to understand why the masters do not appear in the open with their work. Whole volumes could profitably be written along this line. It is the very reason that you sometimes do not venture to express your opinions even within your own home. You know, as long as you are silent you have no opposition, but once you have spoken the whole thing is open to controversy. Then again, you feel the right time comes to speak and it is all acceptable and everyone cooperates. What moves in the universe also moves within man. To know himself in some of these most simple things is his key to great understanding and power. Paragraphs 17 to 26. The motive is much the same and is but further emphasis upon the importance of silent cooperative work in the positive realization that the great creative spirit is working through all men in some degree, and the important thing so far as we are concerned is that we make it a more vital issue in our own lives. Paragraphs 27 to 32 afford additional opportunity for amplification along the foregoing lines and can become a vital factor in liberating the people to progress. Teach the people to expect and prepare for changes. Become sensitive to the changes now moving underneath the political and economical structure. The change that will liberate is not in any of these outer forms but is in the hearts of men. Chapter 2. The One Mind. 1. We have evidence of the control of the one mind. In every field of action we will note the one mind control. Even upon this boat you will note that there is one head, consequently there is one control, with many activities under that control, and all these lesser activities emanate from that centralized authority. 2. It is only through this centralization of power and authority that there is anything like harmony in the operations of any organized section of society or even within the individual. We all know what happens when there is a division of power, or rather an attempt to divide authority without consideration of some central motivating source. The orders which go forth from two sources to the various centers of activity can result only in confusion and chaos. If power emanates from more than one central directive head, the authority is destroyed and the entire structure is broken down. 3. Where there is one controlling element which has dominion, power, or control of motivating action, we are brought directly to that one element and, thereby, brought to one pointed action which we have discussed before many times. It is through that action that we do accomplish, and that action brings us into a harmony with that central control, in that we do not scatter our forces but work with the one force, or power, which is complete control. 4. You always bring yourself into accord with that to which you have delegated power. That is, if you believe in the power of the world and its environment, you are seemingly receiving directive control from 1,000 different sources, and this is the source of your confusion. You do not know whether to obey the seeming demands made here, there, or some other place, and this division in the consciousness breaks down the entire structure of man's nature. He must know, whom we have believed, and become persuaded that he is able to keep that which we have committed unto him against that day. 5. That one control does exist for every human being if he will but use it. Of course, the use of that control must be conscious, it must be consciously directed or used for the purpose which we decree or which we establish. It is through the establishment of that control that our thoughts are brought into that one power of action or one thought of expression. There they cannot help but express that which they send forth. In other words, the motivating principle we determine must come into existence. His servants are ye, to whom you yield yourselves servants to obey, and the manifest results must be determined by the outworking of that motivating force from which you receive your direction. The results can be no greater than as the power vested in the authority. 6. This central control of the universe is often called principle as well as mind. Principle does not bind it as closely perhaps as the one mind. Still, that principle controls and governs, and it knows what it is doing, it governs with intelligence, so it must be a mind principle. The Hindu always puts it as principle, or the Almighty, which means that man does become that mighty, controlling element. Man stands in his almightiness the moment he projects his thought to that one control, that one central directive authority. 7. It is also simple if one looks at the entire situation with an open-minded and sane approach to it. You say in your own mind that this person or that condition has power to make you sad. This is delegating authority to a definite location or form. Obeying the authority which you have thus assigned, you embody in yourself the mental and emotional state which you recognize as existing in the nature of that authority. You could not possibly think of embodying joy from a source that you decree has only the power to make you sad. Then, through your obedience to the authority, you embody the sadness which you have admitted it has power to manifest in you, and you say, I am sad. You become that which you embody. This is the whole secret power, but, to manifest that mighty power that is ours, we must obey that source and embody the characteristics which it possesses. Then we should not hesitate to proclaim, I am that, as the Hindus put it, when that becomes the thing we have embodied. This will all become perfectly clear to anyone who will dwell on the matter for a time. 8. In this state, willpower is not a method of control. Willpower gives us the impetus for bringing that control into existence, but it is not the motivating factor back of the control. Will may differ entirely from control. Self-will never is able to project thoughts to one central point. Definite control or mind action is capable of carrying thoughts, feelings or actions to one central control, which is a definite attribute or element that man uses always and which he has dominion to work with. Not over, but to work with. That is the very force which man brings into activity the moment he brings his thought to that focal point of principle which activates all conditions. 9. Let us take a very simple illustration. Man has power to bring his mind into subjection to the principle of mathematics, but he does not have the will to make the principle act. The principle acts of itself and is a single center of control within its sphere. Man may bring his will up to the point of the activity of the principle, but from then on the principle as the motivating force, and through this subjection of his will, to be more accurate, he finds the secret of his mathematical power. The principle of the human will is that it is to be brought into subjectivity to some higher authority, and thus man becomes the embodiment of it and is possessed of the power of this higher authority. Man's weakness is brought about through making himself subject to that which in reality has no power, and this should be proof to him of the immense power which is possible to him. He must now learn to apply this principle of his own will and recognize power as existing only in the one principle. 10. Our everyday life is a concrete application of this fact, in that our statements conform to the one principle or one mind. We vision or project an ideal. Let us say that that ideal is for perfection. We immediately come into direct accord with the one mind control or principle. We project an ideal for ourselves to accomplish. If it is a high ideal, that power immediately becomes active and brings that ideal into existence. The moment that ideal is projected and the force back of it becomes active through it, that ideal is complete. That is, the moment the ideal is released from the activity of our will and is projected into the activity of the one principle, it is a completed thing. 11. So long as there is any dual sense, it is difficult for anyone to see how this can be true on the manifest plane. The masters do not take into consideration any plane outside of the spiritual made manifest. If we do not take into consideration any plane outside of the spiritual, it must be in existence always after the statement is made, even before the statement is made. We quite evidently withhold from ourselves the accomplishment of our ideal because we look to three planes upon which it may manifest. It is found very conclusively today that it manifests only on one plane. It manifests on the spiritual plane always. It is always fact. 12. Now if we hold to and remain within that spiritual plane, we would see it in its true expression. We would not need to look to the material at all, for when we do, we speak in terms of materializations, and materialization is not spiritually a fact. The actual thing is the fact always. That is the spiritual made manifest. 2 + 2 = 4 in the mathematical principle, it equals 4 in the mind, and likewise in manifestation. This is not three planes, but it is all the mathematical fact, separated or differentiated at no point whatever. 13. After the manifestation, it is said that it does no harm to name it material or physical because you cannot harm the fact. But it is always elevated or exalted to the spiritual. That was Jesus' meaning when he said, "If ye exalt all things to spirit, they are in existence already." Evidently he had that very thing in mind when he gave the prayer, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and that you do hear me always." He knew fully that that which he saw as his ideal was already accomplished. To him it came forth instantly. Then he gave the statement that, "If you go forth into the vineyard, it is ready for harvest." 14. Now, if we take that definite position, there is no question but that we would be out of all of this difficulty completely. He immediately rose above every difficulty by the very attitude that he took. It was not a long, arduous process to him. It was instantaneous. He saw completely through the non-existence of them. That is not claiming that he denied them. It is quite evident that he never denied any condition. He always rose above it to the true spiritual condition, and then there was no need for denial or for paying any attention to anything but the true spiritual condition. He said, "I live always in spirit." 15. Our Bible says, "I live always in a spirit," being an entirely wrong interpretation. The interpolation of where it does not belong makes a lot of difference. That is where many mistakes were made in our understanding. 16. The Christian Bible says, "God is a spirit." The original was, "God is spirit," never confining him to one attribute, to one condition. One writer said, "It is like trying to crowd God into the quart measure of our intellect." Spirit and mind are synonymous. They are one and the same in vibratory influence. That which seems to make a difference is that we take our thoughts as indicating mind. Mind is consciousness, for mind and consciousness are inseparable. The element of consciousness is thought, and when conscious of spiritual fact, there is no difference to us between mind and spirit. We are in a state of spiritual consciousness. 17. You are right in thinking of mind as consciousness in action, but so is spirit consciousness in action. They, too, are synonymous. Either may become quiescent or become submerged in the individual, but they are not submerged in the outer condition. If the outer is like the inner, mind is never submerged in the individual but is only quiescent. The individual only thinks that it is submerged, and to that person it may become non-existent because he is not conscious of it. The consciousness is always there and springs into existence instantly if one projects consciousness toward that which always is, the spiritual fact. 18. The element of consciousness is the directive rather than the motivating agency of mind. Thus, it is indispensable in the sending forth of the emanations of mind, or, as we put it, in stepping up the emanations of mind to their true state, providing the element of consciousness is true to the spiritual fact. 19. Today many scientists are approaching this same conclusion regarding the underlying cause of all things. They dissolve the whole structure of substance and resolve it all back to emanating energy identical with spirit. Spirit is all-pervading, it manifests in everything. It is found that all elements, including radium, are reduced to that one primal element, emanating energy. But this energy, in the last analysis, is not blind force but intelligent force. It knows what it is doing. Scientists even admit that there is a certain form of electricity that seems to know what it is doing. This all-pervading, creative energy back of all things is aware of itself, aware of what it is doing, aware of how to do it, and we therefore call it Spirit or God. It is omnipresent, omnipotent, and omniscient as the Christian Bible puts it. 20. When man begins to assemble in his consciousness the activities of any principle, he begins to say, I am that. This is the centralizing of the authority of the principle in himself. I am renders the mind dynamic instead of letting it rest in potentiality. It becomes dynamic the moment we focus thought upon I am. That focal point is the center always, and from it emanates the authoritative commands that control and determine the entire status of manifest man. The I am must be used to indicate man's true estate, that which he is in fact, and not what he has seemed to himself to be in manifest form. I am that I am, which is the embodiment of the motivating authority of the universe. Beside that I am, there is no true existence but only delusion. 21. This name, I am, was God to Moses. It has come down through the ages as I am. To the Hindus it is Aum, which means the same. Likewise to the Aryans it is Aum. The Chinese use it as Tao. 22. The so-called blind spots in the ether common in our radio and scientific fields is in a sense symbolic of the blind spots in human consciousness. The radio beam crosses right through these non-magnetic fields as if they did not exist. Our layers of atmosphere, the concentric bands of atmospheric conditions, are in motion. In our Earth they are stationary. When a non-magnetic field moves over a magnetic field of our concentric bands, a vacuum-like condition is established. When a magnetic field passes over a non-magnetic field of the Earth's surface, it passes right through it and is lost. It is frequently more powerful at night than in the daytime. These non-magnetic fields are like the static states in human consciousness, more intense with greater darkness or ignorance. But the positive radiations of the spiritual I am, the declarations of that which man is in fact, penetrate through these static fields of his consciousness, and it is as though they do not exist. The persistent declaration of spiritual facts regarding man's nature and his place in the universe eventually will eliminate all these static fields in human consciousness as well as in his affairs. 23. The one mind is not constantly creating new ideas. It is manifesting ideas that have been created from the beginning, for the one mind is and always has been omniscient, all-knowing. It has never been nor will it ever be more or less than itself. It is all a process of reverberation. It is the same as our radio currents today. They are flooding back and forth or reverberating from one space to the other space. That is, from space to space, as you might say. 24. Thought is, of course, the most potent of any radiations because it has control over the vibratory field of electricity and radio. In fact, both the vibratory field of electricity and of radio will impinge and reflect from the vibratory field of thought always. Radio follows a track in the atmosphere regardless of a conductor. It follows a true track or trend. It operates through the ether. But thought in this sense does not travel, for thought is omnipresent. It is already there no matter to what point you refer. It is the impingement of thought upon the electrons that causes thought to appear to move. Mind is the motivating element, thought moving concurrently with mind and in striking upon the electrons produces all movement in the plane of manifest substances. 25. That which we call space is in reality the one spiritual mind. That is the principle by which the human soul, which is the replica of the spiritual mind, can overcome time and space, for there is no such thing as time and space in spirit. In spirit all is complete, and in completeness there can be no such thing as time or space. This is what is meant by letting the same mind be in you which was also in Christ. It is a state of complete oneness existing in fact between the individual and the universal soul, and it must become a conscious fact to the individual. That is the complete mind, the controlling mind, functioning through the individual consciously. 26. Physical man or man conscious of himself only as a physical being that thinks he is apart from God, the one mind, and thinks in terms of moving from place to place, is only moving in illusion for himself and, hence, unhappiness. He really is in and of that one mind and lives and moves and has his being in it. In Jesus talks his greatest statement was, "Peace be still." It is never said in a loud voice, projected of the will of man, but in unison with the calm, knowing power that comes from a sense of oneness. There is the greatest security and the greatest power. We have seen some of the greatest storms overcome by that simple statement. Likewise, the seeming brainstorms of human mind are stilled until one can feel the controlling power of the one mind. For the teacher. Paragraphs 1 and 2 give ample opportunity to conclusively point out to the individual that so long as his mind is divided he has, by that act of division, lost his sense of power and direction. Only from some definite premise can any structure be builded, and until one has arrived at this premise he cannot proceed to do anything. This must have been what Jesus meant when he said, "Thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve." Paragraph 3. This one underlying principle of life, God, is the controlling and ruling force of the universe, and man can find himself only in relationship to this principle. The only adjustment that will harmonize man's being is a realignment of his entire nature with the facts from which he came. Paragraph 4. Man himself has assigned power to the external world, for there is no power there originally, nor is power there even when he has seemed to delegate it. That power still remains within himself, and that which seems to be power in environment or anything outside of his own I am, his central identity, is the perversion of this same power within himself. The power is always within man, and it works according to the direction given it. But back of it all is the controlling force of the universe, and that which I am individually must be one with the I am which is universal. Perfect accord must exist between cause and effect, for the movement of the cause is the life of the effect. Paragraphs 5, 6 and 7 can be further extended along this same line, and the lesson made of eternal benefit to every individual. Nothing else so completely tallies with the true message which Christ tried to give to the world as this. "Greater things than these shall ye do," was his estimate of man's potential capacity. Paragraphs 8 and 9. The most helpful lesson and liberating practice can be developed from these two paragraphs. The willful attempt to force thought into the place of manifestation is a hopeless task. It is destructive to the individual who practices it. The acceptance of universal power, a central executive emanation that produced heaven and earth as the already completed manifestation of itself and the self-existent fact back of every constructive idea of man, is the way to liberation. Paragraph 10 shows the method of procedure in so-called demonstration, which is, in the last analysis, stepping aside from our sense of incompleteness and imperfection to accept the facts. Paragraph 11 shows more accurately what happens in this matter of manifest results. A freeing of the mind from all duality is the solution to the whole matter. Paragraph 12 is a further extension of this same idea. Paragraphs 13, 14 and 15 can be made to strengthen foregoing. Paragraph 16. Can we not once and for all make clear that the different minds, as we call them, are but a difference in thought? Mind functioning as what we call mind is this same spiritual capacity in man functioning in its lowest capacity through perverting it to lesser purposes. When man thinks the thoughts of God after him, his mind is then spiritualized or functioning in its true field with God thoughts, thinking as God thinks, or, more accurately, knowing as God knows. The human mind thinks, the God mind knows. Paragraphs 17, 18 and 19 give excellent opportunity to extend this idea further and to drive home the idea that man is not truly living until he consciously functions in harmony with his source. Paragraphs 20 and 21. The true use of the I am is to maintain man's original identity in and with his source, not allowing it to descend to include within his nature that which he is not. Man is not his experiences. He is what he is. Experiences with that which seems less than himself should never be admitted into his estimate of himself. I am always that which I am in spirit, not what I seem to be in experience or what I have experienced in the world. No matter what I have gone through or seem to be going through, I still remain what I am in the original sense, the image and likeness of God. Paragraph 22 shows the far-reaching influence of spiritual fact as transcending all sense of limitation. Spirit takes no account of evil, of loss, lack, poverty, disease. These are but blind spots in human consciousness. To the mind that knows, there are no such things, and it goes right on with that which it knows and is. Paragraph 23. The mind which is God is the same yesterday and forever. That which seems to be a new idea to us is but our discovery of what always was. Healing and so-called demonstrations are not bringing something into being but are an awakening to that state which has always prevailed in fact. Paragraph 24. Power of thought, so-called, is not the power of thought. Thought is only a conveyor of power. Power is in spirit, and thought conveys or carries power only to the extent that it conforms to the standards and purposes moving in spirit. My words are spirit, said Jesus, meaning that his words accurately conform to the universal trend which he called the will of God. Paragraphs 25 and 26. Present man is an integral part of infinite space and not an isolated being among isolated forms. By one spirit are we baptized into one body. Finding our calm in this eternal unity of all things is our position of power, where all contrary illusion is dissolved into the peace and tranquility of illumination.